Howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it's time to talk Path of Exile. Synthesis League is starting this weekend, and you know what that means? That means there is going to be a totally new, totally blank Atlas of Worlds for you to fill in once you get through the 10 acts and get up to Katava. Now, if this is your first time getting that far in the game and experiencing the Atlas of Worlds, I'd advise you to just start out by just trying things out and running maps as you sort of come to them, and not really focusing on min-maxing. You can't get that first attempt, that sort of first fresh feel ever again. I think it's worth just experimenting a bit. There used to be ways you could really stuff up your Atlas of Worlds, but nowadays those have been removed. And essentially, at least I'm going to argue in this video, that there is nothing you can do that will be difficult to undo on your Atlas in the current state of the game. When you get to the Atlas of Worlds, it will not be the filled out image that you're seeing here that has every map visible on it. Instead, it'll pretty much all be it'll all be that sort of greyish background colour, and you'll only be able to see the 4 corner maps: Iceberg, Alleyways, Cursed Crypt, and Fungal Hollow. And if you're watching this at a time when Synthesis is not the newest league, those maps will be different. So if you were watching this during the Betrayal League, you'll see a different set of 4 maps there. If you're watching this in a future league, again, they'll be different again. However, I think the fundamentals will still be the same. For each of the maps is of one of 3 tiers. And here's the same image presented in a different way. And I'll give links to these images because there's some absolutely great visualization tools that have been put out by the Path of Exile Reddit community. Each of the maps will be either a white map, a yellow map, or a red map. In the white maps, your goal is going to be to complete all of them while they are at least magic rarity. So magic or rare. With the yellow maps, your goal will be to complete them all when they are rare. And with the red maps, your goal will be to complete them while they are both rare and corrupt. So that's the strategy that's required in order to maximize your Atlas bonus, which will be a number that will appear in the center of the screen here, that will be a fraction of 159. And at least 159 in the current state of the game. That may change. And each point of Atlas bonus you have, so you'll start with 0 and you'll work your way up, each point will improve every map drop that you get by 0.01 tiers on average. So if your Atlas bonus is 17 and the game would assign you a tier 5 map drop, it has a 17% chance of instead replacing that with a tier 6 drop, and an 83% chance of still being a tier 5. If you would get if your Atlas bonus is 120 and you would get a tier 5 drop, you will instead be guaranteed at least a tier 6 and have a 20% chance to drop a tier 7 instead. All of that is subject to a very important rule. You can only get maps you've already beaten, or maps that are directly adjacent to the map you are currently in. So for instance, if you look at the tier 4 Mausoleum map here, and I've just noticed that this image that's on the internet, this should be tier 3, the maze, but tier 4 Mausoleum. If this is the highest map you've done so far, and the game would assign you a tier 5 map drop, it will assign you either a cage or a grotto. Even though there's other tier 5 maps that exist, like Crater over here, or Thicket, or Courtyard, and there's still more than that, they won't be able to drop because you haven't beaten them yet, and they're not directly connected by a line to the Mausoleum map. This also means that if you would get a tier 6 drop, if you've not done any tier 5s or tier 6 maps, you will instead, that tier 6 will be an invalid drop because there's nothing that is adjacent to Mausoleum that you've beaten before that's in tier 6. So for that reason, it will downgrade to a tier 5, and you'll instead get a cage or a grotto. So what your goal is early on is to build up your Atlas bonus quickly. As you get closer to the center of the Atlas, you'll find that your maps, the maps that you want to progress, so the maps that are a higher tier than the one you're currently running, they will start getting diluted by drops of lower tier maps. So for instance, if you're in a tier 3 desert map, there's only 4 tiers of map, and you kill a magic monster, so one that can drop at most one tier higher than you're in at the moment. The tiers it could drop are tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or tier 4 maps. And so there's a fairly good chance of getting a 3 or a 4, which are the ones that you're interested in. If you're in a Vile Pyramid map, tier 9, and the highest map that can drop is a tier 10 in this situation, let's say that you've not completed any tier 10, so Mesa is as high as it can go, then if you're running this Vile this Vile Pyramid and a map drops, it could be anywhere from tier 1 up to tier 10. And this is important. Means that the higher you get, the more maps you need to get to drop in order to be able to keep working towards the center, because a number of the maps that you get will be maps that you've already feel you've finished with. There is a bias towards higher tier maps, so for instance, if you're in Vile Pyramid, you'll be more likely to get a tier 9 map drop than you are to get a tier 5, and more likely to get a tier 5 than you are to get a tier 3. There's a bias towards higher tier maps, but it's not strong enough to overcome the just increase in number of additional tiers. So for that reason, the closer you get to the center, the more important it is to have a decent Atlas bonus to help make up for these additional tiers of maps that are diluting the potential drops. Now, it used to be a strategy that was pretty close to universally accepted within the Path of Exile community, that when you started mapping, you should beat all the tier 1 maps and then not start doing tier 2 maps until you had all of them in your stash. So you'd run your Cursed Crypt a few times, eventually you'd get a dungeon from it, then you could stop running Cursed Crypt. You'd run Fungal Hollow a few times until you owned both a Strand and a Peninsula, and then you could stop running Fungal Hollow. You'd run Iceberg for a while, then eventually you'd pick up a Ramparts and you'd stop running Iceberg, and you run Alleyways, and eventually you'd get an Excavation and a Haunted Mansion. Once you've done that, you would then go ahead and start running all your tier 2 maps, and you would repeat maps until you had all of the tier 3s in your stash, at which point you could then try again, go and start clearing all the tier 3s, working your way up to tier 4s. The reason that was important back in the earlier days of the Atlas of Worlds, and even up to as recent as the Incursion League, was because it was very hard to fill a hole. What I mean by that is, let's say that you discover after you've sort of felt that you've finished all of the tier 2 map running you ever want to do in the league. You've outgrown tier 2 maps, but you realize that you never did Ashen Woods and you don't own one. And let's say you've also finished with tier 4s, you don't really want to go back there either. If you then discover at a later stage, oh hell, I've never done Ashen Woods, I don't have this map, I can't seem to get it to drop, then you would come to a tier 2 map, and you'd come and look for maps that could drop it, and the only maps on the Atlas that could drop it would be tier 2 Ramparts, tier 4 City Square. These would feel like an absolute grind to run, and you would feel like you're making no progress on your character, and also you would probably need to run quite a lot of them. Anyways, there are a couple of system changes that address this. Firstly, there are the Zana mods, and I did a video on these the other day, but basically one of the Zana mods that was added, and this has been in every league since, this was in Betrayal League, it was in Delve, and it didn't exist before that. It replaces a map with an alternate map of the same tier. So if you were to put an atoll into the map device and use this Zana mod alternate of the same tier, which only works on rare maps, Zana's mod will preserve that it is a tier 3, but it will make it one that is not atoll. So you could end up opening portals. It consumes your atoll map, and it consumes a Chaos Orb, but it might open up portals to a Jungle Valley, might open up portals to an Ashen Woods, a desert, a maze, because maze is actually tier 3, not tier 4, that's a mistake on this map, an Arid Lake, a Ley Line, a Barrows, or a channel, or a spider lair. Lots of possibilities, but the key thing is it gives you a way to keep targeting Ashen Woods. If you've missed it, you've outgrown tier 2 and tier 4 maps. The other key systems change is the way that the masters work. In an earlier phase of Path of Exile, Zana was not what she is today, and this only changed in the Betrayal League. Now, when you do one of Zana's Atlas Daily quests, she will be available in your hideout to sell you a collection of maps afterwards. And these have a pretty good chance of being the individual map that you're missing to fill holes on your Atlas. The third change that was made, and this is probably the most significant one. If you vendor 3 copies of the same map, say for instance Ramparts, up to and including the Delve League, there would be no agency in determining which map you got back. You would get a tier 3 map, it would be one connected to Ramparts, but no matter what 3 Ramparts maps you offered the vendor, you would always get the same map back. So let's say that was Jungle Valley. You take 3 Ramparts to Zana, and no matter which 3 you gave her, she would always offer to sell you back. She would always offer to give you a Jungle Valley in exchange for them. If you then went to Vegan, who was another vendor you had in your hideout prior to the Betrayal expansion and some of the changes that happened with lore there. Now Vegan's an enemy you fight, but back then he was a vendor that you'd be able to interact with. He would offer you exactly the same thing, a Jungle Valley in exchange for your 3 Ramparts. What happens now is if you each map has a hidden statistic somewhere, and the game combines these statistics from the 3 maps that you offer the vendor, and then combines them in some way and generates what will seem to you to be a random map out of the available options. That'll be determined by the 3 maps that you're offering. But if you have 6 Ramparts in your stash, and let's just call them A, B, C, D, E, and F. If you take A, B, and C to a vendor, they may offer you a Jungle Valley. If you take A, B, and D to the vendor, they may offer you an Ashen Woods. A, B, and E might be Jungle Valley again. A, B, and F, Jungle Valley again. A, C, and D, and that might be Atoll. In this way, once you've got about 4 or 5 copies of a map, just by trial and error and offering 3 different maps at a time, you will be able to eventually fill in the hole that you're missing here. So in this case, now hypothetical here, you'd be able to get your Ashen Woods map and get that hole filled, and then you could move on happy that you have completely and forever finished with tier 3 maps in that league. And then as you progress further along, although this becomes worse and worse value over time, you'll notice that it's for cheap maps like 3 strands, you are losing a little bit by going from 3 strands to 1 channel, but you're not losing a lot. The closer you get to the center of the Atlas, the more wasteful this becomes, and so the less likely you are to want to do it, but also the more resources you'll have in the league, and so the more you'll be able to expend that extra little bit of currency. So, for that reason, it's no longer as big a deal to leave gaps in your Atlas progression as it once was. And for that reason, I think there are new strategies that should be employed in filling out the Atlas. The last thing is that Zana's daily maps were changed. Zana's daily missions were changed. If you're running a tier 7 map and you encounter Zana in it, which might be your daily Atlas, daily Atlas vision encounter with her, or it may just be her appearing by random chance inside that map. Zana has an 8% chance to spawn in every map that's created, and sometimes it'll be your lucky day. When that happens, Zana will present you with a list of missions that you're able to choose between. And there is a good chance when you run a Zana daily, especially if you've got quite a few holes in your Atlas, there is a good chance that she will offer you an a mission that takes place in a map that you haven't yet completed. So let's say that you're running through beach, you're running through a beach map, this is your first tier 4 of the entire league, and then boom, Zana appears and offers you a choice. You can run a mission in an armory map, this tier 4 over here, a marshes map, this tier 5 on the other side of the atlas, a crater map, tier 5 down here, or a grotto map, tier 5 here. The map she offers you, if you're in a tier X map, the maps that she offers you will be tier X or tier X plus 1. And these will count. If you complete these, they will mark the map as completed on your atlas, and if the map was difficult enough, so that means if it was at least magic for a white map, at least rare for a yellow map, or rare and corrupted for a red map, then that will actually count towards your atlas completion bonus as well. So, for this reason, with your Zana dailies, you want to ruthlessly prioritize those holes, but it's no longer a big deal to get holes in your atlas. What you want to do at this point is run your highest map at any given time. And you also want to make frequent use of the ability to turn one map into another map of the same tier. So, which you'll unlock that early in Zana's quest chain. So let's say that you've completed Ancient City and you're running Sepulchre as your first tier 6. You'll run your Sepulchre, and let's say that you get quite lucky and you have 3 Sepulchres drop while you're doing it. No other tier 6s can drop because you haven't done any other tier 6s yet. What you should then do is use Zana's alternate of the same tier on one of your Sepulchres. This will give you a tier 6 that's somewhere completely different on the atlas. Say, for instance, you might end up with a geode. As long as you can beat that map, and it will scramble a mod, so sometimes you won't be able to beat it. You know, you'll get unlucky, you'll get Elemental Reflect on a build that can't handle that, and you'll be disappointed and you'll have wasted your map. But if you're able to do it, suddenly you'll be in a situation where geode will be able to drop in the future for you from any other map that you're doing, and when you get a few of them stockpiled, you'll then be able to run them and get Pier, get Graveyard, get Shore, all of these maps that couldn't previously drop. You're now close to them. You don't yet have them unlocked, but you've got something that's one step away. So you'll be able to hop around the atlas like this, exploiting Zana's alternate of the same tier ability in order to start rapidly filling out your atlas. You'll be leaving holes, but you'll be making rapid progress and getting this all-important atlas bonus number to be soaring up. While you're doing this, you'll also find that you will encounter the Shaper and Elder influenced areas. It's very important that you get onto the Elder influence to start spreading through yellow maps as soon as you can. The first time that you beat a tier 10 Elder influenced map, you will unlock for the rest of the league the ability to upgrade a tier 5 map to shape it up into a tier 10 via the Zana map device. And this will mean you will never have a shortage of tier 10 and lower maps again. So, that then puts you in a position where you no longer have a shortage of any yellow maps or even of low red maps, because you will get some tier 11s that drop if you use Zana's +5 levels to a tier 1 to 5 map on a self events and you run it. That self events is potentially capable of dropping an arsenal map or an arena or a basilica, as long as you've beaten them once. One of the other key things that will happen when you're running maps is that sometimes the boss of a map will drop a map that is 2 tiers higher. This is only able to happen if you've already beaten a map that is that high. So for instance, if you're running Ancient City, the boss can drop a tier 7 map. And whilst it doesn't happen every run, it's not stupendously rare either. However, if you've not beaten any tier 7 maps at all in the entire league, that will be downgraded to a tier 6. This is quite wasteful, and it's why it's important to get at least one map of each of a few higher tiers unlocked as quickly as possible, so that when you're running tier 5 maps in order to fill in all the holes on the atlas, so that they can drop tier 7s to help you with progressing through tier 7s. Then when you're running your tier 7s and filling in all the holes that you've left there, you will want those tier 7s to be able to drop tier 9s. You don't want them to be wasted by being downgraded to tier 8s because you haven't done a tier 9 yet. It's not possible to never waste a map upgrade, to never waste a +2 in that way, but you do want to minimize it. So, using these strategies, you'll be able to get a good sort of 60-70% of the white and yellow maps filled in fairly quickly. Keep in mind that Zana will sell you, once a day, Zana will sell you a whole load of white maps, yellow maps, and then as you start completing Zana missions in harder zones, she'll also start selling red maps, although generally not at a competitive price. Keep working on those, and you'll be able to get your Atlas bonus towards the 120 mark. At this point, there's a couple of key things that will come up. Firstly, there will be some stubborn maps you can't get to drop. If you're in solo self-found, there's not really much you can do about this other than just keeping hammering on the with checking Zana's daily maps and trying to force Zana to spawn one tier below the map that you're trying to chase. So for instance, if Mud Geyser was a map you could not get to drop, it's a tier 7. So if you were to run a lot of tier 6 maps, if you keep running them long enough, Zana will eventually appear in one of them. Has an 8% chance to happen in any given map. And when that happens, she's got a good chance of offering you a mission in a Mud Geyser. So that is one way of trying to get that stubborn last one in solo self-found. But if you're in a trade-enabled league, there's another way which is even better, and that's just simply to trade for it. There is a channel in the trade leagues, which is Trade159. So you can enter that just in the game client by hitting enter to bring up chat, then typing /trade space 159. Then, although a lot of the generally the trade channels in the game are full of very bad offers that players shouldn't pay any attention to, the Trade 159 is a bit different. The vast majority of offers in it are made in good faith, and it's people who want to trade maps 1-for-1 or who want to trade maps for currency. If you've not been able to get Mud Geyser to drop, undoubtedly there's someone else that just can't get Ghetto to drop, or that just can't seem to get Fields. Perhaps you've got a spare of a Pier, or a Fields, or a Ghetto. What you do is, in Trade 159, just type T7 space have Fields space want Mud Geyser. Other people will see this, and if they're in the reverse situation, they'll be like, yep, let's trade. And you can just join a group with them. One of you jumps into the other person's hideout, you do your transaction, and you've then filled in your hole. My approach usually is to leave the acquisition of the filling of holes by trading for the last 2 on any given tier. If there's 3 or more that I still need to that I'm still missing on a tier, I will use Zana's alternate of the same tier to fill it. And then once I get to the point that it's that's no longer the case, that's no longer efficient, because too many times I'm just getting repeats of maps I've already done. At that point, then I'll start trading. But you don't need to do it the same way as I do. You can do it your own way as well. Maybe you just decide to go straight to trade. The other thing that Trade 159 is really good for, if you've started a league late, and so there's plenty of people that already have lots and lots of maps around, and you've been fairly lucky with currency while you're leveling. Let's say you had a Divine Orb drop for you, or maybe even better, you had an Exalt drop for you. Or maybe you had a Saint's Treasure Divination card, which is 3/5 of an Exalt. These are all things. These are all highly liquid commodities, things that you can sell easily. In Trade 159, it's pretty common for people to sell complete sets of maps of a given tier on request. So, for instance, and market conditions will determine within the league will determine whether this is a good price or not. You might be able to say, want complete set tier 11, tier 12, and tier 13, paying 1 Exalt. And if that's a fair price, then someone will jump on it and will say, yep, here you go. I've got everything except I'm missing Crystal Ore. And then you can negotiate further, and maybe you say, all right, well, how about you give me 4 Chaos in lieu of the Crystal Ore, give me everything else, and have your Exalt. If you're someone that got to maps earlier than most people, you can be in the reverse position and just advertise that you're selling complete sets of a given tier. I sold several people during the Betrayal League complete sets of red maps, so that's every tier 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 map. And I believe at various points in the league I was charging 2 Exalts without Vile Temple, then 2 Exalts with Vile Temple, and then as maps continued to fall, I think I ended up selling them at 1.5 Exalts later on in the league. The price that's fair varies, but the principle's the same. Jump in Trade 159 and transact when available. The only point that is going to be difficult if you follow the strategy I outlined early on of jumping around the map, of basically running your highest tier map and jumping around the map wildly with Azana's alternate of the same tier, is once you get to red maps, alternate of the same tier is no longer available. At this point, however, red maps are much more worth your time to run. So let's say that you've decided that you want to complete all of the red maps, and then eventually, let's say you're just going to do a complete full Atlas clear like I'm intending to do in the Synthesis League at the moment, but you just can't seem to get the Palace map to drop. Even once you get to, say, level 90, you're not going to feel like you're wasting your time running a tier 10 Moon Temple. So at that point, you can just go, alright, I haven't been able to get this to drop, but I'm just going to jump into a Moon Temple and run it, and eventually I'll get there. If you start running out of natural tier 10 maps while you're doing this, you can run tier 5 maps augmented with Zana's +5 map tiers on a tier 1 to 5 map, which is something that you'll unlock by the time that you're starting to get seriously into red maps. So those are my tips for the Atlas exploration phase. So that's the phase of the Atlas where you're going from 0 Atlas bonus just at the start of the league to having an Atlas bonus of around 120 or so, where you feel that you've mostly completed exploring the Atlas. You'll still have holes to fill, and you will want to come up with an actual plan for which maps you deliberately do not want to complete. That's a whole different topic, and there's a lot of different trains of thought on that. My strategy going into Synthesis is going to be to complete everything, but there are very compelling reasons why you might not want to do that. The other thing you'll have some problems with is unique maps. And the unique maps on the Atlas vary from common, such as the Coward's Trial, Wakahakadakatui, or I can never pronounce that one. Then there's uncommon maps like Malkoon, Poor Joy's Asylum, Hallowed Ground, Putrid Cloister. And then there's some ultra rare maps and special drop only maps. The Doriani's Machinarium and Parandus Manor are the two very, very rare maps on the Atlas at the moment. There's not really any very good way to target these maps and to fill them in. Generally, in trade leagues, people's attitude is usually one person buys the map and then they will sell a portal. They'll sell a certain number of spare portals to other players. So for instance, if you're running Parandus Manor early in a league is usually about 2 Exalts, which is too much to pay for just adding one to your Atlas, completion. But that can work for 6 players. And so what you can do is one person purchases Perandus Mana and then they offer to sell portals. Perhaps they charge 40 chaos a portal. And then they open it up in their hideout. There is a necessity for trust here because there's lots of ways that if players don't play along well together, they can get hosed by this transaction. But generally, I think should act with integrity on these sorts of deals. You won't get scammed often at all, and then you run the map, you complete it, and you 6 people can get credit for the cost of 1 map. So that's one thing. The other thing that's commonly done early in a league is what's called a unique map rotation, which is where each person picks a unique map that they own, and you just go to one person's hideout. So you all form a group, go to one person's hideout, run their first map. So maybe they've got Ober's Cursed Trove. You run Ober's Cursed Trove, you complete it, everyone gets the Atlas bonus. The next person has Poor Joy's Asylum, so you go and run Poor Joy's Asylum as a group. You complete it, and you move on. Next up, you've got the Coward's Trial. Unfortunately, the next person also had the Coward's Trial. Now, sometimes you would screen out people like that in a unique rotation. Sometimes you just be like, oh, okay, well, don't worry, you don't need to contribute anything because you at least said you at least were going to contribute one. It just wound up not being needed. The next person has Olmec's Sanctum, and then the next person has, say, Acton's Nightmare. With this strategy, if you had no unique maps completed, suddenly you've only used up one of your unique maps, but you've gotten 5 completions with that. And then maybe in your next one, you'll get 3 repeats, but you'll also pick up Maelstrom of Chaos from one person, and maybe maybe Pillars of Arun from another. And then in a future unique rotation, you might pick up Careblade, but nothing else because you've already done everything else. So unique rotations are a good way to get your Atlas completion of unique maps turbocharged. Doing them solo self-found is really ugly. I don't believe there's any good way to do it. Perandus Mana is pretty much impossible to acquire in solo self-found unless you're willing to go to the extreme extent of farming Ivory Temple for the Mare Divination card, which I will point out is quite a rare divination card. And there's also a few other maps that are pretty unlikely to show up as well. So if you're running solo self-found, just expect you're going to have to make do without 159 Atlas completion. But you can get a fair number of them from the divination card, the Encroaching Darkness, which I believe drops from natural red maps, but also it can drop from lower tier maps as well. But I believe it mostly drops from natural red maps like Palace or Reef or Desert Spring, which is basically anything that's in this central area of the Atlas. Anyway, those are my tips for getting your Atlas filled out at the start of a new league. Do keep in mind what you're aspiring towards, because you may decide that you want to deviate heavily from this strategy if, for instance, you want to set up your Atlas in such a way that Precinct is the only tier 12 map that can drop. If you're doing this, you may end up deciding that you are going to leave all tier 12 maps that are not Precinct or Sunken City uncompleted. And in that case, you'll then need to adjust the strategy considerably to deal with that. Lastly, you also have the very limited resource of Harbinger Orbs and Horizon Orbs, which can also help shuffle you around the Atlas at various points. Harbinger Orbs are generally too precious to use in this way, but Horizon Orbs are a bit more common if you're running your Shaper Strongholds when they appear. You won't get very many of these, but again, there's something that once you get into the inner red maps area, let's say for instance you come in this way, so you do Palace then Reef, and you don't have anything on this side, so you haven't yet had any of these red maps drop. You could then just use a Horizon Orb on your Reef, and maybe you'd be unlucky and get a Crystal Ore, but if you're not so unlucky as that, you'll get boosted around to somewhere else that's completely disconnected from where you are, which again helps you a lot in terms of just spreading out your position on the atlas. Anyways, any questions you've got, feel free to ask in the YouTube chat. Otherwise, have fun in synthesis when it hits in just a few days.